Today I want to talk about spiritual gifts in your church plant, particularly in the early hours of church planting, the early years of church planting, those very early days when there's not that many of you, maybe a very small core group, or you've just got to start your Sunday meetings, and how do you work out spiritual gifts at that stage? And my feeling on church planting is that you walk a very fine balance a lot of the time. You balance between faith and pragmatism. Okay, so faith on the one hand, pragmatism on the other. Or another way of saying it, you have how do you build big? How do you dream great things for the future? And at exactly the same time, how do you not blow the whole thing to pieces before you've even got started? And it's a constant struggle, really, trying to work these two things out. They're very different things. How are you trying not to run ahead of yourself, but at the same time, not spending your whole time just kind of staring at your feet and not dreaming big of the future. So there's a real balancing act to do that. And this really works out with spiritual gifts particularly. It's just one of those key issues to work out. Particularly when it comes to Sunday meetings. Now, I know spiritual gifts are not just for Sundays. We want them to break out into our lives and our workplaces, our families, our friendship groups, whatever context we find ourselves in. We want to be praying for the sick. We want to be prophesying over people, all of that sort of stuff. Excuse me. But most people learn how to use their gifts in the gatherings of the church. Maybe they experience them there for the first time, and maybe even that's the first time they actually get to use them. And so working out how we do spiritual gifts, particularly when we are in public Sunday meetings, is really important. And I want to tell you 3 stories of how we have worked that out. The first one won't make me look good, but I like telling those stories. They're kind of fun. And the second 2 make me look a little bit better. So that kind of, we can roll with the punches there. But the first one came in the very early days of Christchurch, Manchester, particularly our Fallowfield site, which is a very studenty part of the city, and that was the second site that we planted, that me and Vic were involved in planting. That was our first one. And we were in our second year, I think, and we gathered maybe 30 or 40 people, and I was completely new to this entirely, and there was one particular meeting, I remember it really clearly. Now, we were made up of a church full of people who were either very new believers or were returning back to God for the first time, or were just learning what it meant to be a Christian in the first place. And that was very much our crowds. And not many of them had much experience of charismatic gifts, spiritual gifts at all. But one week, I was anchoring a meeting. I don't think I was even preaching. And the worship leader was doing very well. So it was a good vibe. I felt like God was there. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll jump up and I'll tell everybody to sing out or sing out in tongues. So that's what I did. Just jumped to the front and said, right, okay, the band are going to keep playing. You guys just sing out. Let's all sing out loud together. Let's sing out in tongues as well. And we started doing it, and I stood at the front and, faced people, because I thought I can be a good example here of how this must work. Unfortunately, that gave me full view of everybody. And there were 2 guys right in the middle, and I can remember it clearly now. The look on their faces is burned on my retina. I can remember the look of horror, shock, embarrassment, total alienation that was on their faces in the middle of the room. And I can remember their faces very clearly because I commit them to memory, because we never saw them again. They never came back. I tried to convince them to come back, but as far as they were concerned, we were just totally weird. And so they were gone. They left us forever, which kind of weighed with me, because they were either brand new Christian or actually probably wasn't quite yet a Christian, one of them. And I always feel like we blew it with them. Always feel like actually they were our people. They're the ones we wanted to come through. But we'd scared them off entirely, and they never came back. So that's the first story I want to tell you. That's probably how not to do it on any number of levels. And the second 2 stories I want to tell you are much, much more recent. So we're planting in an area of South Manchester called Burnage, which is right on the Kingsway, a main road into the city, and we call it CCM Kingsway. And we have been preaching through a particular series, and the guy who was preaching a few Sundays ago was a guy called Tom O'Toole, and he came to me and said, look, this one is about the Holy Spirit falling on David. This seems like a great opportunity to pray for people. And so me and him, we talked about it for ages. Well, we've not really done this in this site yet, in this part of CCM. We've got quite a few new people. We don't really know many of their backgrounds actually in this stuff. How are they going to feel about this sort of thing? So we talked about it loads, and we planned exactly what we were going to do, how we were going to organise the response, how we were going to pray for people, the point in the meeting when we would do this. We even talked about what we would say afterwards, where people would go. We planned it out meticulously. And Tom preached, and he's an excellent preacher. He preached really well. People were really with him. The worship leader did really well. It was a great morning. And that moment came up. Tom got up and said, look, this is what we're going to do. Really explained it as we talked about, and then said, guys, come and stand at this point. And numbers of our people went forward, met with God's, and it was very powerful, and it was fantastic. And I think we learned in that moment that actually it doesn't need to be spontaneous. There seems to be a bit of a thing around the charismatic where it just kind of happens and you got to go with it. Like God is some sort of fleeting butterfly that's easily scared off. But actually, we planned it very carefully, and in our planning, it forced us to have a lot of faith. Actually, sometimes there isn't much faith in just suddenly making something up on the spot and going for something right there and then. But actually planning it out, having to think about it, really kind of, we were psyched to do it. We were ready to trust God. We were ready to go for something. We were also both deeply aware that people could have just shook their heads and sat down, and that could have been it. So, and it was really important for us because we wanted to build that into our church plant very early days. There was only 25, 30 people there. And there was also a few people who are quite prophetic and had different words that they wanted to bring. So I talked to them beforehand as well and said, look, this is what we're going to do. I might ask you to hold fire this week. I might ask you to come forward and bring something. Just be ready and be ready not to be used. And they were great. They were very humble. They just wanted the conversation. And so in community together, we all kind of worked out how we were going to do that. And my hope is that we have discipled our little group, at least for 1 week. This is how we're going to do things. This is how it's going to work. Now, it isn't to say that we will never be spontaneous and that God will never turn up unless he gets a Google Calendar appointment with us. It's not what I mean at all. Actually, there could be some weeks where who knows what happens, but that's up to him, not me. I know what I can do. And the third story I want to tell you is just this week just gone. Following a week where God was really with us powerfully, I was kind of mulling, well, I wonder what will happen this week. I wonder what the best way to go is. And actually, I thought, you know what? We can't do this every week. There is only 25 to 30 of us. We're on a journey together, and I hope it's a long journey. And so I don't need to hammer this straight away. I don't need to go after this. And I wasn't anchoring a meeting. I wasn't preaching. I was just sat there, part of it. And the girl, Jo, who was anchoring, is very good at it. And she felt like God had one word for her. And she just jumped up, a good point in the worship, and just say, I feel like God is saying this. It's for one person here. And then we moved on, and people prayed out, and it was very good. But actually, in that moment, we didn't push it down, but that was enough for that week. That was saying, this is what we're going to do this week. And actually, we discovered that what she said was very powerful for one person. And that person moved on a number of steps in their particular journey. And so we've realized, actually, we need to go one step at a time, 1 week at a time even. But we can plan, that we can work this all out together. Sometimes when you see spiritual gifts used at big conferences or bigger churches, often it's very, very front-led. And there isn't a lot that a smaller church can learn from that, because you can't be as front-led because you know everybody in the room. So you really have to talk with people quite a lot. So we decided we're going to work this out in community as much as we can. Also, we've realised that we want to respect people's backgrounds. Actually, we have numbers of people who come from different church backgrounds to us, some cases very different. We have some people who haven't been in church at all, and it's very new to them. And so we're bringing people from lots of different points on the scale, I suppose, and trying to take them on a journey so that we can grow together in a particular direction. So that's what we wanted to talk about this evening, how spiritual gifts can work in a church plant, how you can work them out on Sundays particularly. The Broadcast Network, there is a lot more stuff there on this issue. Go to the broadcastnetwork.org. Simon Holly will be on tomorrow evening, and you can book in for that now. There are links all over the place, so book into that. He's fantastic on this issue, and he will talk about building a culture for this in your church plant. But that's me done for now, so thanks very much. If you have any questions, just tweet them, just comment underneath on the Facebook page. We will do our best to answer them for you, and we're finished. Thank you.